I apologize. I thought I saw them, so I didn't.
You know that.
No, it's my fault.
So, all right, we will approve those at the next
That's what happens being here 2 meetings in a row.
All right, with the bills,
Are we?
One question. Where was the marble rock used?
Assuming that was what we did in the intersection.
I think that was down by before we stop. That area by that planter.
Okay.
I meant to ask you earlier, Joe, on the storage generator and domestic sewage. Is that permits had to happen to you sort of thing out there? I thought that's what it's probably, but I just confirmed that.
I make a motion to approve the bills in the amount of $31,681.67.
I'll second that.
Is that you, Dan?
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Painter,
Yes.
Davis,
Yes.
Cummings,
Yes.
Rath,
Yes.
and I apologize. I found that I didn't send them. I'm so sorry.
Okay, seeing unless Nora has one to comment for us. No. Okay.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
You know, if a man kind of goes through our office sometimes at work. And I heard really great things about how St. Joe treated Diploman and how organized St. Joe was with how they handled Diploman. And I personally was really excited about how they handled our project and our little makers up in our tree. I just want to thank the village and Public Works and everything for how they handled our project. And I'm so excited that they got cleaned up so fast. So I was really pleased.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, I will go down to old business. We are back to talking about the building. Okay. I know Joe's got a few things back and forth that was sent to the consultant, but there was still some unanswered questions.
We're waiting on the private comp, so we just get the private comp, you'll have all the information.
So, the only thing I mean, I'll be anxious to see that, but, the only thing I still just, my own personal concerns is using up our credit for, unless I see a really huge savings on the overall project. I guess I'm concerned about the maintenance and adding,
So that's
More
one thing,
things.
a couple of things he said is that they had $10,000 in maintenance in their agreement. Does that sound right? $2,500 a quarter for maintenance?
I have to look at the numbers like.
Yeah, and he said, what would that be? What would be the maintenance? Come out there and rinse them off with a hose, and they wipe them down? I mean, there's no maintenance to them. If they go bad, you get an alert and you change out a detector or panel or something, but there shouldn't be. He said that seemed wrong. He said the price per watt seems really high. That guy said, what, 280, 285 a watt, and he thinks it ought to be down around 235 to 250 a watt. And then he thinks that the number getting back from the SREC is way up too.
Well, I guess all I would need to see is his big number.
Right, exactly. But I'm just saying, I think it's worth the wait. But if you guys choose that you want to go a different route, I'm not going to stand in your way. I'd probably vote against it, but just because I don't know all the info yet. But
We just get that number.
right, and that's what he's been working on today, I think. So just like everybody else was super crazy, and he's doing it as a favor to for me. And but I just think that I think it's gonna be worth it the other way, unfortunately. I think that we're gonna want to buy it. I think it's gonna be the best way to go, but if the board chooses against it, then that's what we'll do, but I'm hoping that he showed us that the number is way better to buy it versus. And like in them, we'd have some questions for those people too, like the maintenance and what goes on and all that stuff. I mean, if it's just a matter of washing them down, if that's what they so desire, that's something our maintenance people can do. We don't need to pay somebody $2,500 a quarter to spray them down with a hose or whatever, if they're dirty or whatever.
I wonder if part of that maintenance might be mowing, because I've noticed that one on the insert, you buy guy, it looks like there's a private contractor that mows that, it's not university people, but, you know, I haven't really scrutinized. I just wonder if that was because you see them mowing between the panels. I assume that's several reasons why keep any kind of brush
Right.
obscuring.
And maybe it is. I'd be more interested to know what that is.
Yeah.
About than anything else.
Okay.
So you think we'll have it for next meeting?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was working on it today. I don't think he got you anything at the, yeah.
It doesn't need to come here to the meeting, it needs to be in our consultant's hands with plenty of.
Yeah, so he can look it over and.
Can you try to, if
disagree.
I can get it tomorrow, I can get it to the guy and he'll have like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I gotta talk to him tomorrow. Find out what's going on.
All right. We will move on down to new business. We have a few, special event permit, to basically approve. I think they're somewhat self-explanatory in your packet. The winery sheet is, and the 5K both have gone on in the village in the past. The 5K is the one that I think they are affiliated with the school. It's cross country. Yeah, cross country. That's gone on for many, many years through the downtown. The winery, she's done that a couple of different years now. This will be, I think, her third year maybe.
Yeah, they're
This is her third, I was thinking third year, but, and the Balloon Fest is, Balloon Fest that is in Champaign. And, my friend Mark, forwarded, or shared our name, place, because they always are looking for a fun place to launch during their festival. So the actual festival won't be here, but it'll be, a part of their festival, because their festival will go on in Champaign. But they always have a site where they come out with the balloons and then launch from a separate site. And then the balloons, usually where they go, depending on the wind and stuff. But anyway, they had apparently looked at Homer Lake, about Homer Lake, it was issues there with Homer Lake. So they came in, because Mark, of course, mentioned Outlet Park, thinking it would be a good site. And they came and looked at it, and Joe and I met with them and thought it would be an excellent site. So that would involve about 13 balloons that were launched early that morning. And basically, that's all they'll do is launch from here, but it would be pretty spectacular for people. Just to be aware of that and watch all the balloons leave St. Joe, weather permitting, of course, so that's always a big factor with balloon things. Sometimes you have a great plan in place and then the weather changes its mind and.
I think you gotta have winds less than 10, isn't it, or less than that?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many factors with the balloons between, you know, how wet it is and the wind direction, and if there's wind, you know, so, anyway, so hopefully the weather will be perfect for that, and I think that would be a fun thing for the community to, head out to the park and watch them all take off, and
I make a motion to approve the special permit for the Balloon Festival launch.
I got one question before you get, is it just, is the way I see it, it's gonna be set up in the parking lot there? Looking by this highlighted,
yeah.
It's the question I have, we got.
we're gonna do on the side of the field.
Into the soccer
No,
field,
just,
that balloon,
maybe it doesn't.
Well, there was a double X on here, the reason I asked.
Yeah.
There's two.
Yeah, that might be, so maybe that's why.
That's not gonna be big enough.
So the question I have is, we had residents have said that we're putting traffic on that.
Yeah.
The soccer field.
Well, and if it's wet and raining and that sort of thing, we'll keep that in mind too for all of our park properties.
I went out and I didn't see any damage.
Yeah,
So that was the whole point of me having the marks in there, so if it's dry, not a problem. Field, if it's too wet, it'll keep the parking lot area.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
so, but yeah, we'll watch. I mean, yeah, if we have a monsoon before that, we wouldn't want them on any of our grass areas. They probably wouldn't be on the grass areas because they maybe very well get stuck.
Okay.
So, but anyway, but that's how that is. I mean, if the weather's bad, they're not gonna be out there anyway, so
We do each one separately.
I think we do need to be separate.
I would, yes.
Yeah. So I was motioning second.
Yes.
Mhm.
Painter,
Yes.
Davis,
Yes.
Cummings,
Yes.
Pratt,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
And I make a motion to approve the July 2023 5K.
Second.
Davis,
Yes.
Cummings,
Yes.
Pratt,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Painter,
Yes. Then I make a motion to approve the winery special event from
I'll second that.
Cummings,
Yes.
Pratt,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Painter,
yes.
Doug Davis,
Yes.
Saturdays is gonna be a hot one. They have lots of water out there. All right, next one is, we already approved this, a while back. It's the little minor subdivision, it's basically just 2 lots. Over there, on the southwest edge of town, where they tore down the older home. They were just wanting to divide that into 2 separate properties. So this is the actual resolution that we have done.
Up on the screen.
Oh, we already approved these at a regular straw vote or what?
You know, you already approved it, and
Yeah.
what's,
It's just a resolution.
this is just in case you run into any. complications.
All right, I'll make a
They
motion.
tore that house that down, Dan.
Good, I'll take them over the rooms.
Yes, motion to
Copy room.
resolution.
I'll second it, Max first.
Pratt,
Yes.
Wagner,
Yes.
Painter,
Yes.
Davis,
Yes.
Cummings,
Yes.
Wagner. Sorry, they've all been 5-0.
The next item is the Safe Routes to School application. I will let Joe explain this or answer any questions. The details are in the packet in regards to, we've already discussed a little bit about using our hours there at regional planning also to put together this grant. As you know, since we're not always eligible for some of the, especially the grants that have to do with income levels and things. So the best way to even hopefully get any type of these grants is to be well prepared in advance. And so we're hoping by having all of our ducks in a row here with this grant that it'll give us a better opportunity to maybe get the grant. So it takes quite a bit of work getting all the details and everything that they'll need to look at. And I think by having those details and all the plan set in place, when that grant is applied for, then that just puts us in a better position of receiving the grant. So this one would be a good one to get if it was, because this one covered by the federal government.
It's 100% paid by IDOT.
So this one would be an excellent one to get a hold of. So it would be great if we can get everything put together and be ready to submit it when the time comes. Any questions?
Basically, you've got the proposal in your packet.
Need to make a motion.
Just like the mayor said back in February 22nd, 2022, you set this in motion, and we used our hours at that time for RPC to conduct a take-home survey with parents and kids for walkability, and they've since done that, worked with schools to gather that data and get their input, and then collected the information. The streets that are listed in this are the revised list. Myself and Gabe from RPC went to an IDOT regional meeting whenever they were advertising different programs they have available. And they went over our previous application that we submitted a few years back. And went in detail areas where we can improve. So when you go to the tasks that are outlined in the scope of services here, one of them is a state route to school draft plan that is pretty important. And it's one of those that you just build off every year. And I wanted to see that pretty clearly that anytime they fund something that's going towards a bigger picture plan that we have in mind. So anyway, so obviously the goal is to try to get it, try to get the grant. But even if we don't get it this first year, there's not going to be near as much work to do the following years and so on. So the steps that are going on right now, we're currently, Public Works is working on getting some rough estimates for pricing. And then if you approve this tonight, I'll begin coordinating with RPC. When possible, I will plug into this and do the administrative part of this. But once we have that, we're basically going to build a budget up to $250,000 with projects listed. And once we hit 250, that's all we can ask for. And then we'll have to have the engineering done for the streets and the improvements prior to applying at least a high level set of engineering. So anyway, that's what it is. There's a lot of work that goes into these, and it's if you ever have a constituent say just go get a grant for that, you should point out to them that whenever your low to moderate income level is high, which is a blessing in most cases, but it's a curse in these areas when you're trying to just get grant dollars. So anyway, just with all that said, I just need a motion to approve it. If you're on board with it, if you're not, you can tell me no and then we'll stop.
I'm on board with it, but I do have a question on that. I know previous talk on some of it have been a large sidewalk instead of the 4 foot. Make it 8 foot, and none of those standards. Does that have to be determined by the engineering at that time? I got no problem with them defining that.
That will go into it, yeah.
Okay.
And then I'll share this survey with you to see, because what they're going to try to hit is specifically the top areas of concern with the survey, and the engineers will design around that.
Okay.
Or we get the list.
I just noticed there wasn't any specific, sizes or anything like that. The location, I mean, I'm fine with this. I'll make a motion to approve it.
I'll second it.
Wagner,
Yes.
Painter,
Yes.
Davis,
Yes.
Cummings,
Yes.
Brett,
Yes.
Tyler.
Okay, Joe, do you have anything to add? You got your administrative report here in front of us. Do you have anything to add or share with that? Mark?
Well, you have my written report on your agenda, but Joe asked me to give you an oral report, kind of give you an overview of tax increment financing TIF districts. And it's something that we should be looking at if we're trying to come up with a tool for economic development. And it's pretty much the only tool that's left that's available for small towns or in big towns as well. The concept is that you go through a process identifying parts of your town where you want to promote economic development. And there's some pretty minimalistic criteria that you used to justify creating the district that show a depressed area of the town or underutilized property in the town. So if you wanted to have a TIF district in your downtown, you could do that. If you wanted a TIF district to help encourage development of a subdivision in a certain part of town or commercial development in a certain parts of town, you could do that. And you could do more than one TIF district. And I'll talk to you briefly about how they work and what they mean, but before I get to that, I'll briefly touch on the fact that you can't make your entire town a TIF district. I think you're limited to basically a third of your town, but you can break it off into multiple districts. The way the district works is that at the point you create it, it takes all the assessed value of the properties in that district at that point that you create it, and it makes that the baseline. So as those properties sit there and pay the same tax that they were paying all along, that money still goes everywhere it's supposed to go. At the moment that you develop a property, and the difference between that baseline and whatever it's assessed at is called the tax increment. And that's going to generate new money that wouldn't have been there but for the fact that you had this TIF district. And that new money gets paid into the TIF district. So what happens is then you now have some money that's in the TIF district that you can use to reimburse developers for qualifying stuff. And the basic qualifying stuff are things like public improvements that they would otherwise be required to put in, like sewer and infrastructure kinds of things, and certain building things. And you get to control what those are, but you're capped with whatever qualifies under the statute. So a great example is I want to put in a brand new subdivision on 40 acres of farmland. And I want to, and it's just that farmland's been sitting there for forever. So we've got a TIF district that's in place, and that pre-existing tax base is whatever the value of, whatever the assessor says the value of that land is. So I'll come along and I'll say, well, I'll sign an agreement with the village that says, I'll go ahead and develop this TIF district, or excuse me, this subdivision. I'm going to put in all the streets I'm supposed to put in. I'm going to put in all of the drainage and all of the other infrastructure that I'm supposed to be in there or put in there. But I want to get reimbursed for that from the TIF district. Well, as the village, we sit there and we say, well, that sounds great, and we want to make sure it happens, but we don't have any money in that TIF district, so we'll sign an agreement with you that says if you really do what you say, as money comes into the district, we'll start reimbursing you for that stuff. And when we reimburse you for that stuff, we're going to reimburse you maybe not at a full rate of 100% when it comes in, but we'll reimburse you at a rate of say 50%, so that we'll have like an extra 50% that we can start to put in the bank that we can use to fund other projects as they come along. So that's how you fund that. And what the developer can do is the developer can go to the bank with a copy of our TIF district or TIF agreement and say, hey, bank, once I get this baby going, I'm going to start getting reimbursed for big parts of this over time. If you'll buy into that, you'll loan me the extra money that it takes for me to put in all of this infrastructure. And that's how you get it funded as a developer. So your question is, well, Mark, that sounds all great, but aren't we cutting out a bunch of taxing bodies from getting this extra money? And the answer is a little bit, but not very much. There's a formula in the statute that reimburses the school district, guarantees them a minimum stream. So when that property goes up in value, they're going to get additional money from that property And that comes out first before we get that net amount of that extra money that we're gonna get to use to reimburse the developer, right? And so there's a guaranteed minimum of 25% of the stream that the school district gets. The districts that get cut out above or beyond that are a bunch of little small districts like us, our own city, regular tax that we would get from that increased value, we won't get, it's going into the TIF district. Any other kinds of small taxing districts wouldn't get any of that. As the money goes into the district, if you have extra money and you want to fund special projects for other governmental bodies down the road, you can do that. So the question is, well, is that fair to all these other little governmental bodies? And the concept that you have to buy into to understand how it works is, if we didn't have the TIF district to jumpstart this development, it would have never happened. So they would have never gotten any money, period, anyway. They're always still getting the baseline that they were getting anyway. And then their payoff ultimately will be when the TIF district expires in 21 years, all of a sudden, if the TIF district worked, we've got a bunch of developed property and their revenue is just going to skyrocket at that stage. If we put in a TIF district and absolutely nothing happens, the only downside is that as a village, we wrote a check to whoever did set up the TIF district for us, and we're out that money, and that's it. There's no risk to the village whatsoever. Now, sometimes you'll see a village that's really hungry to get something going, and they will lend the TIF district some money to be seed money to get a project going, and then pay themselves back from that. But you don't have to do that, and you can just sit there. So the best example of this would be in Fisher, and this dates me a bit, but this is a couple of decades ago. But in Fisher, we have our own school district, right? Have water, got sewer, got a police department. Problem is, we didn't have any people. And we were down to something like a graduating class of 18 or something like that in high school. And we were looking at having to probably merge the high school with something else. So we put in the TIF district and did a residential TIF district. And we were able to jumpstart a subdivision. And they did it in phases so that they weren't too risky. And that first phase was sold out right away. And that little town is kind of a bedroom community for Champaign, but also a bedroom community for Bloomington. And then at the time, it had some manufacturing. So all of a sudden, we got a bunch of families move in with new houses. And fast forward 10 years later, they were starting to look at building new schools because the schools were full again. So that's not going to happen in most places, and all of the stars were lined up when that happened there. But that's the advantage of it. Now, here's the really, really, really cool part that nobody really understands, but is the big payoff. But Chicago hates this, which is why they hate the TIF districts. In Illinois, all of the schools share a bunch of state money. And when they're calculating that, they're looking at how much money everybody makes in an area. But they're also looking at the value of all the real estate in that area. And the poorer you are, a bigger piece of that pie you'll get per kid. When it comes to that formula, when Fisher had that subdivision with all those brand new houses in it, they don't get included in that formula. The TIF properties are exempt from that formula. So even though you had a bunch of nice middle class, upper middle class houses generating a bunch of revenue, they counted the kids for purposes of how much money they were getting from the state, but they didn't count the value of the money or value of the houses when they were figuring out how poor Fisher was in order to figure out the distribution. So that means that the school district got more money per student, both with the income stream from TIF and from the state of Illinois, without even figuring out how much they're going to get at the end of 21 years when the district's up. So that's a pretty serious win. So that's the big advantage that you have for that. I've got other communities where we put in TIF districts that are kind of industrial districts, downtown commercial districts. Some of those have had some decent activity and it's a nice tool. But I don't believe that we've got any that I've, on my watch, and I've got 14 towns. Of those, I'm sure 8 or so, 9 or so have TIF districts. I've not seen those be real big generators like what we had in Fisher. In Tolono, we did emulate what they did in Fisher, and I think that accounts for a lot of the big subdivisions that you saw, that you see in Tolono on the edges. As a result, when you have a successful district, early on, you're not going to see any money from the village standpoint at all. But if you remember, if you're reimbursing the developer 50% of the stream, that means there's some money left over, right? There's the other 50% that you didn't give to the developer for the reimbursement. So if the district is successful and then as the district moves forward later, probably 10, 12 years into it, you're going to start having cash that you can use. And you can use it on stuff in the TIF district. You can't just spend it on anything you want. But you can also fund special projects for the other public bodies. So in Tolono, we did things for the schools. We did quite a bit for the park district, and quite a bit for the fire district, and quite a bit for the library. But you couldn't get generous until you had the money, and there's a lag time before you get there. And it requires things to pop and fund, right? So that's kind of how they work, and that's what I know about them. I'm here to answer questions.
I got a couple for you. Who administrates the TIF? I mean, money does it go to the county or do we do it? Who does the county part of it?
The county calculates the difference that I was talking about and then sends it to us.
Okay.
And then we keep track of the money and we file an administrative report with the state once a year. We can do that in-house or we can contract out for somebody to do that for us.
And another thing, using the example that you had on like some farm ground where you develop, could you come in and declare, okay, we're going to make this a TIF, even though the landowner doesn't concur with that?
That's correct, yes.
You could do that
Yeah.
without, okay. And then using the analysis, well, that I sent you on the question, but if we use the TIF for that, could we go ahead and build the infrastructure to sell off or maybe keep leased land or something like that, with the idea we are going to make a profit at the end? I know you had.
The we is not the village. It's going to be a private developer that's paying taxes.
Okay. Well, I'll get into more detail on that some other time. But
Yeah, if it's a property that the village takes over and then we kind of do some stuff with, when we put it back on the tax rolls and it starts generating money, it'll generate money for the tax increment. But there won't be any money in the fund up front, so there won't be money that the village could use for that.
And that 25% you said that went to schools. Now they got, okay, you got your value here, they're getting the same amount, but in that TIF, I didn't realize that they still got a cut of that TIF.
They do. They get 25% of the net amount. So
Okay.
we'll have costs in doing the administration of the thing. But then that net amount, which is the big bulk of it, they get a minimum of 25%. You can, when you're putting together a TIF district, you got to get permission, or you got to get consent from the school district. They've got to be educated so they can see the math and understand.
But you don't have to they don't have to agree to it. You can go ahead and arbitrarily do it.
No, you could. You have to
Well,
get.
my impression was before when we looked at that.
You can, but it's
better.
You can, but it's very difficult to do that. So
Okay.
ultimately, you're going to need the school district's participation.
Well, I think we should. Don't get
But
me
if,
wrong.
but if you look at the math on it, it takes them a while because I think they're losing money on it, but it's just the
Mhm.
opposite.
Well, that's what it was before.
Yeah, I
That's what
mean,
it's coming across before, but I think they need to be educated.
they're educated now. I think
Have
they,
some of those laws changed a little bit with the TIF district, say in the last 5, 6 years?
Yeah, but for what we're talking about, no, not significantly, but I will say that it is correct that there's a lot of, every year, there's a lot of tussle with the state because anybody north of I-80 doesn't like this. Because it's ultimately, meaning they're getting less distribution of the funds because of that formula that I talked to you about.
Well, that was the hangup, was the schools, really.
Yeah.
A lot of, I mean, I wasn't here.
We went through a lot.
But they wanted a big chunk of the money and you didn't want.
They didn't want to lose any.
Like,
Yeah.
That felt.
Yeah, and I said, it was never
You know-
explained to us before about that formula, you know, because they said that,
Do they know?
that explanation was never given to us as far as.
that's the first I ever knew.
No, but I don't think, do they know that?
So,
Well, and they're welcome to talk to Gibson City, Fisher Schools and Tolomo Schools, Unity Schools.
They can watch this video too.
And, and just say, did the math really work or is somebody blowing smoke?
Yeah, it was.
my impression was, from what we were
They
told,
can
that
watch
TIF,
the video.
if we decide we want to do it, we really didn't need their consent. But we're trying to be amiable and even assurance we give them, but anyway, it didn't work out. But if they're still getting a piece of it, like you said, there's gonna be a big lag for several years, but. Thank you, Mark, appreciate that.
I guess just to bring this into focus a little bit, so Mark has some connections with folks that do this type of consulting work. And what I wanted to get out of you is, are you interested in having Mark reach out to his contacts and starting this process to see if it'd be a fit for the community?
Yes.
I
I
think,
think it's something.
I think it's something to look at, but I think before we get too deep into it, the schools need to be educated.
well, it depends where you're gonna be. Now, another thing you mentioned, you had 21 years, I thought it was 22, you could renew it too. Or you could cut it short.
You can always shut it down anytime you want. You can extend the TIF. And I think it's 7 years. But you have to get agreement with everybody to extend it. You just don't get to it automatically. But they happen pretty frequently only because it's profitable for everybody.
Yeah, I read about, you talking about Chicago, the one for. They were talking about in Chicago that was actually some of the parks, but it actually, the money went into downtown Chicago. There was a little, well, into Chicago.
It is Chicago.
That's what I'm saying,
It's a whole nother country.
yeah. But no, was it always been 20? I had it in mind, it was 22. That's all right.
I can double check utilizing my Google
No,
search mechanism that I maintain on my phone.
Don't worry about it.
If you all are interested, we can, just start the process.
There are a couple of ways you can do it. I mean, I think the least expensive way to do it is you have a TIF attorney set up the district. Could I figure out how to do it? Yeah, but you're better off just having somebody that just does it all the time. And then you can try to keep the administration of it in-house. In my experience in a smaller community, that really taxes your administrative staff a lot in a big way. And it takes them away from the real stuff that you need. So I like the idea of us using a company that administers the TIF for us. And what happens is if Joe gets a call from if it's a downtown TIF, one of the people has a development they want to put together, he just has them contact the administration office, and there's somebody that goes through, walks the people through what they can do, and then they got all the software to do all this modeling. To say, well, if you figure out that it's going to have this impact on your business and you've spent X dollars on this, and the assessor gives you this much value after you're done with this, this is the additional income stream we see, and this is how much reimbursement you could get over the years. And then that's something they can take to the bank. I think it's really hard for a smaller community staff that try to pick up on that and be in a position to do it. The downside is you got to pay these people the money to do it, right? And And, you know, I'm a tightwad, so I don't, that kind of bothers me, but in my experience, when it comes down to it, you really need that, I think you need to have that benefit of.
Was one of the ones you worked with, one we had before?
Probably, I think you worked with,
Fine.
yeah, Herb Klein, and he's with the Jacobs Group. And you've got the law firm part, and then you've got the administrative services part, and they do Fisher, Gibson, and Tolano.
Okay. Well, thank you for the information. I think you helped clarify.
There used to be more, and they're not more. There's a guy out of Springfield who's doing Paxton's. But he's too far, and he doesn't have the same support network that I was just describing. He's doing it.
Where is Paxton that's creating a tip?
They have a tip in the downtown.
Oh, in the downtown, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. There's a couple of people further downstate that do it as well. There was somebody in Champaign who was doing it, but he's retired.
Okay.
And anybody that I've seen doing it does a good job, but I've had quite a bit of success in the other towns with Herb's office, and
Okay.
they seem like they really have it down, but it's not free.
Okay. I don't know what we pay, but we.
Those ongoing costs be paid out of the tip.
Problem is, that's not gonna happen for a while, so,
Sure.
you know, I think if you use the 10-year time horizon, you'll be pleasantly surprised. But you know, the setup cost of it isn't crazy. I mean, it depends on what you're doing, but I think you're looking at probably the $20,000 or $30,000 range to get it set up. So that's your worst case scenario, is you set the thing up and then you're out tens of thousands of dollars on it, which isn't great, but I think it's worth the trade-off. And then and then administration wise, the way they get paid is they're getting paid with a small percentage of your tax increment. So they've got an incentive to help you lay in deals and get stuff to happen. If they don't, they're not getting paid because they're not doing it.
So would the process for this be either to go ahead and we get educated more about the TIF before we start something like that? Or do we need to be identifying some areas that we'd like and then discuss that with them in conjunction? Because there's only, I think, two of us here that were on the board with.
When they were here before,
Yeah.
I'd have them come back. I mean, they're just gonna give you their version of what I just told you. But you can ask questions, get a feel for it. They'll talk with you more about asking, well, what parts of your town are you concerned about? And here are the things that can be reimbursable. This is a technique that seems to work. And in this town, we did something that kind of did what you're talking about. So that might work for you guys, that kind of thing. I think there's benefit, and it doesn't obligate you, and they'll do that for free.
Okay.
It's just kind of a sales visit from their standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it.
Got what you need?
I got it.
We're good. All right, thank you, Mark.
Yep.
All right, Tiffany, do you have anything? Public Works, I can look.
No, not this time.
No, not this time.
All right, thank you. Town's looking still good. Continue to have people appreciate the cleanup, so that's all good. I had, well, I want to remind everybody who's going to Samoa on Thursday night. It'll be a hot one, but should be beneficial. Get to see the Grand Tool facility. And then I just had a couple of things I wanted to think. Well, first of all, during the cleanup right after the storm, I forgot to mention at the last meeting, and I know Nora had put it in the News Gazette, the cheer team did some cleanup for us right after the storm. Nora, was that like the weekend after the storm? It was really, that they went down to the senior apartments. Yeah, on 3rd Street, and then they also went to Cove Park and did some cleanup as far as the cheer team there at the high school. So I wanted to publicly thank them for doing that and you know, jumping in and doing some help on the cleanup. And then, last night, I worked with the Prince of Peace, BBS. Actually, they were 5th and 6th graders. And we did a couple little projects, of course, so we have some pictures that they shared, but they did some raking of the mulch. And they painted, we only got one picnic table done. But they were, Mike got us the paint and, couple paintbrushes, so we scraped and we painted, and they also picked up sticks. And I wanted to show a video that was really, really cute because they discovered a clever way to rake. They were on the merry-go-round, 3 of them or 4 of them, or I think it was 3 of them with the rakes as they twirled the merry-go-round and had the rakes going, and it was the cutest video. I was hoping to be able to share it with you because it just turned out so cute. And of course, me and the 2 adults that their sponsors that was watching it was like, of course they would come up with that fun way to rake the mulch. So anyway, but they picked up sticks and they did a great job on the picnic table. So I wanted to thank that crew for being helpful and getting a couple of projects done out at Cope Park. So so that's all I have. Do you guys trustees have anything?
No,
No?
I don't.
Okay, so, we are gonna go into executive session, so Terry,
So I'd like to make a motion to enter into executive session for the limited purposes of discussing the purchase of real property for the use of the village pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2C5, and to discuss the employment, performance, and compensation of one or more specific village employees pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2C1.
Well, I was gonna get there.
Sorry, just a second.
thank you, Nora.